This episode of The Dental Guys is brought to you by the Dental Crafters Network, your implant restorative connection. From surgical planning to patient-specific guides, quality implants, and final restorations, the Dental Crafters Network provides one relationship, infinite possibilities. Call 1-800-472-8302 today.
You're listening to The Dental Guys, episode 48, a small implant company with big ideas. Do you know which company developed the first 3.0 millimeter two-piece implant? How about the world's smallest two-piece zirconium implant? You might be surprised to hear that both of these are the same company and that it's not one of the names you might think of. On this week's show, we have the owner of this company, Argon Medical Products, Ric Donaca, who will talk to us about innovative ideas in implant dentistry. How did he create and now sustain a unique market in today's product-driven, competitive implant marketplace? Find out next on The Dental Guys.
And welcome to this week's show of The Dental Guys. I'm Wes, the Dental Guy.
And I'm John, the Dental Guy.
John, here we are at probably the most beautiful location that we've ever recorded in, at an undisclosed lodge. We're not going to mention where we are, but it's who we have with us that is most important. I am super excited about this week's show, guys. John, tell us a little bit about it.
Well, this has been kind of a long time coming. We've been talking about doing this show for a while, and it's a little difficult to do this show because the person we have on today, Ric, is in Germany. And so in Germany, you say, well, how did he get here? Well, Ric is an owner of an implant company, Argon.
Well, wait a minute now, John. Not just an owner.
Yeah.
He's an inventor of a dental implant.
Yeah, this is not somebody that you get to talk to every day. Somebody who actually was involved in the design and manufacturing and testing of a major implant. And this is not just a copy, but this is a new design.
Yeah, I think that's the thing to mention here is that we're not talking about a knockoff of a connection. We're talking about true innovation, true engineering from the ground up, looking at what science has shown. And, that's what we talk about on the show, John.
Yeah, that's why we wanted this. We're excited about this is because we wanted to talk to somebody who has done it from the ground up, because we're always talking about basing what we do on research, on science, on innovation, and proven designs. So we want to welcome Ric. We're glad to have you.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so before we talk about your company, because obviously we spent a lot of time talking about the company, talking about implants, tell us how you got started in dentistry and how you, kind of what your journey was that led you into the implant manufacturing design world.
I started actually as a distributor for four American companies doing implants and transplant material. So I was the first exclusive distributor in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland for, let's say, these four American companies, which I followed for 3 or 4 years before deciding to start designing and engineering my own implants.
What were some of the barriers that you ran into, when you started that, back then, that made you want to just branch out and start your own? Because like that's a big, what you said there is huge. Mm. You did it with some American companies trying to distribute, and then you said, I want to start my own implant company. That's a pretty big statement.
I think each market is a little bit different, and in Europe, it's not the same, let's say, needs, the same implants that you would have maybe in the United States. At that time, let's say the companies that I was representing was, their implants were not, let's say, up to date, I thought. There were some design changes that I would have liked to have implemented. I asked the companies if they would maybe change their system or adapt to, let's say, European standards. They said no, what they do is, correct, and they're the big player in the United States. So I said, okay, then at that time, then we started designing our own implants.
So what kind of background did you have that allowed you to be able to get into the design world? Were you trained in that? Did you have, what was your education that allowed, or was that just something that you learned over time having been involved with these other companies?
I'm basically an electrical engineer from background, and at the time when I started distribution, I had two good friends who are dentists in Germany, and they kind of put me into the implant business. I worked a couple of years chairside with them to maybe look at the technology, see what the indications were for placing implants and so forth, and that's how I got in the implant business. Yeah.
So you had never designed a component before. When you started doing this, you looked at this as
not an implant. No.
Not an implant. Yeah. So it was not like you had been working for a company designing implants. You had you said, I see a need to change something that could be better. And you just on your own essentially started working on that as you were doing your normal day-to-day life. You were also going home and just working on this design or work.
Correct.
How long did it take you from the time that you decided that you wanted to change things to the time where you actually had this turn into a business where you were actually marketing this or talking to people about using it?
We put out our first implant, let's say, after the distribution. It was like about 2 years before we actually produced the first implant.
So 2 years of development.
Correct.
Okay.
Before you even produced one.
Correct.
To be able to place in a patient's mouth.
Right.
Wow.
And then, so 2 years goes by after you made a decision, I want to design an implant. At that time, probably didn't really know where this would take you. You said, well, you're passionate about making some changes and let's see how this is received. I guess you don't know if this is going to work as far as getting this in people's hands. So were some of these dentists that had kind of gotten you into dentistry, did they, were you working with them and having them do some testing with you as well? Is that how you, okay.
They used the first implants, and they were actually my first, let's say, efforts in putting implants on the market, yeah.
So when you saw some successes and you saw things were working, you're getting feedback, I'm sure, from them. What was the next step in going and bringing this to a bigger market? Where did you start? How did you market this? How did you go and start getting this out there? Was it just word of mouth, or did you start actually going out and actively marketing this?
It was the customers that I had for that I had received, and for other implant companies. When I was distributing, of course, I had a good customer base. So these were my customers that I approached, of course, to...
like any good salesman would, you have a portfolio of people that you contacts you become friends with, and that's who you kind of said, hey, look at my product. You had a relationship with them, and that's kind of how you did it, from just a feet on the street type mentality?
That's correct.
So when was that the company actually started? When did the company become a company? When would that have been?
The company actually for implants, the company's been around longer, but for actually implants was 2001.
Okay, 2001. So you'd been working on it since the maybe mid-90s or so on getting into this, and then 2001 the company becomes, this is now a business that you're saying, this is what we're going to do. Tell us about it now. What does the company look like? How big is it? How many markets are you in? How many people are involved with the company? Tell us a little bit about that.
Actually, in administration in the company itself, we have almost 40 people. In the production, we have about 12 machines now, working in 3 shifts, 24 hours. We're doing, let's say, a large number of implants per year. We're selling in over 30 countries in the world.
30 countries.
And
Wow, I didn't know that.
And basically, we're a small, flexible engineering company, so we like to do new products. We like to adapt. We like to listen to what the doctor wants. And so that's kind of what we are. We're a flexible engineering company. Yeah.
So during this whole process, when you started out to form the company, what was your goal? What was the thing that you said, this is who Argon wants to be as a company? What goals did you set then, and have those goals changed now?
My goal at the time was actually to produce the best products possible. I never wanted to be and still not today, the biggest implant company in the world. So we're not producing mass products, we're producing good products, engineering new products, and that's kind of the goal, is to make the best products possible.
So that's really not changed throughout this process. It's been create the best product you can, engineer the best products you can, and that the big companies, while they have their places, you're wanting to stay agile. You're wanting to stay a company that can flex to new designs and new ideas, and that was kind of always the idea, and that's still the idea.
That's correct.
Okay.
So from a standpoint of development, how much of your development relies on clinicians' feedback?
I would say 95%.
95%. Now
Wow.
so you're using what the clinician says to help develop these new products and being agile. And that's one of the things that John and I see that's a real problem, is that we have lost a lot of that touch with these bigger companies.
Mm-hmm.
They're not listening to us. And
Yeah, we were just at a meeting a few weeks ago where it was a smaller company, and we were seeing people that had come from a much bigger company. A lot of salespeople, reps had jumped ship to the smaller company because of mergers, and everything is being bought by these bigger and bigger and bigger companies. And what starts to happen is the clinician says, well, I really would like this design change because this makes a big difference for me day to day. And the red tape and the legal side of things, and it's just very hard to turn such a big ship. And now, this meeting was all about this company. Now these other doctors they're looking for somebody who can be receptive to their feedback.
well, that's the way that I think dentistry becomes better. Is like if you're not touching base with your doctors, and this is how your company started. So I'm sure you still have some of these friends. Tell us how influential they are now, even now.
Oh, even today. I mean, I've had friends and doctors who are on a very personal basis over the last 20 years who have been advising me on products and procedures and so forth. So
Right.
still the contact's there, yeah.
You mentioned one thing I think that was interesting too, is that you spent 2 years or many years chairside to learn what matters clinically.
I still today, chairside. I am often, let's say, in practices, and I am looking chairside to see what's going on.
Wow. Like name the last CEO of some of these bigger companies,
Right.
that is really chairside and paying attention.
Yeah, they have
This
no
is
idea.
the ultimate. This is the ultimate in true, looking at why we're using these products and think, let's go into the products. Like
Yeah.
what are you selling? Because you have Argon is more than implants. I know that. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about that. Okay. But I want to know a little bit about your implant lines. What types of implants do you offer?
We offer, of course, let's say 2 types of implants. One is a, let's say, self-tapping conical implant. We sell let's say, an implant, a cylindrical type implant, which is with a larger surface area for, let's say, pre-tapped osteotomy. And then we sell short implants, long implants, zygoma implants, profile implants. So basically, we're trying to fulfill, the needs of the doctors. So, it's niche markets that we cover. We're covering now ceramic implants. Everything is coming now, and we're a company that likes to cover these niche markets, even though it's not going to be the biggest seller.
So
Right.
you want to be able to provide everything that people are asking for, even if your core may still be the typical root form.
Yeah, the 4x11
implants.
is my favorite implant.
Right.
And you offer obviously a 4x11, either in straight wall or, a parallel wall implant, if you want to call it that, or a tapered implant. But like that's my workhorse because, that's what we use most of the time.
But the same company, working on a zygoma implant and working on
fatties,
ceramic implants and
shorties.
This is a rarity as well today to have a company that has a full line. Now the 2 that you mentioned initially, those are the ones that you've had for the longest time, correct?
Correct.
And those 2 lines have been are basically the mainstay of the company, or have been the most popular.
That's correct.
Now, what is the difference? And you talked a little bit about this when we'd spoken privately before, that there's a difference in the European market and the U.S. market for those different implant lines.
Y'all like, plain healing abutments over there,
Right.
and we like pink healing abutments over here.
What type of
we were just,
Yeah, we were talking about, but what type of implant, in the two designs that you have, what's the difference in the market between what you are selling more of in Europe and selling more of in the U.S.?
Well, let's say in Germany, we're more of the cylindrical or parallel-walled implant. I think it's, of course, that was the first implant I came out with, so people are used to this implant. They also like to, let's say, place an implant at a, let's say, lower torque, about 35 Newton centimeter. They don't like the high torque implants.
Why do you think they say that? Just to kind of branch off just a little bit on that. I'm okay to kind of stop there because that's a big thing for John and I, is that low insertional torque value is important. Why do you think that's important?
I think they've seen the best results. Let's say the market has shown that high torque implants, cut off the vascularity, and in Germany, the doctors are very keen to, studies and publications and so forth. And I think it's been shown that, let's say, putting in an implant at a high torque causes, of course, a higher risk.
Well, we, and we don't want to completely go off on a tangent, but we want to mention that we just spoke about this, that, a lot of times if you're listening to the show and you're wondering what we're talking about, because, this is a high-level conversation, and let's just break that down a little bit. So we know that there's been a big push, and you see this in marketing, toward insertional torque value for how tightly does the implant go in. And the reason that's been a big push has been because of immediate loading, because we're concerned that if we place an implant, that we want to be able to get a tooth on that implant on the first day. And there's been a concern about, well, if you have a low insertional torque, that maybe that implant's not stable enough for loading. So a lot of companies have pushed that. But just this last month, we were just reading an article in one of the biggest implant journals that you guys have listened to the show know. We read a lot of journals, and JOMI is one of the biggest ones. We read International Journal of Oral and Maxillofacial Implants. And Michael Norton, who's a very influential researcher, did a study showing very clearly that there does seem to be a negative correlation, perhaps, between high insertional torque and the speed of healing, the time that it takes to get that secondary integration, that secondary, in other words, after it heals and the bone regrows. So I feel that there's an interesting, push behind the marketing of implants, and that maybe those folks in Europe, they get that.
Well,
maybe
it sounds
more.
like you've been there since the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
for the
things
most
just
part,
really
I mean-
haven't changed there. They're seeing the results are good. So why do you need a higher torque implant? Maybe for some situations to do more immediate loading, because you do have to have a certain amount of rotational stability to be able to put a crown on. But in the U.S., there's a little bit more of a push toward those higher torque values. Is that true?
That's true also with a lot of the Baltic states. In Europe, everything from Russia, Ukraine, Turkey, they put everything at 60, 65 Newton centimeters, so they're really looking for high torque values. The implants worked probably just as well. I don't think we have, let's say we've done some statistics, and it's not, I would think, much of a difference. But let's say the Germans do like the lower torque values compared to, let's say, foreign countries.
Interesting.
Right. So let's kind of bring it back home, though, and talk about these key design features that make your implants unique, because it's not a knockoff. And I think our listeners want to hear a little bit about what you think makes a good implant and what makes yours great.
Okay. Well, it's not quite true that it's not a full knockoff, because let's say I came from an American implant company in distribution that has the same conical connection. The only difference is that we define the torque values. The other implant company, of course, doesn't have the possibility of defining torque values for the actual implant insertion, and they don't have the possibility of defining the torque values for the abutment levels, so that you're not getting the same seating levels in the implants. So yes, the conical connection is not a patented process. It's a Morse taper. The Morse taper is an industrial taper, which is used, in ship propellers and airplanes and everything else. But it's a common industrial taper, locking taper. And this is the idea of the locking taper, of course, was from my distribution days to take that over, but to redesign the implant with features of, let's say torque values that are stable and from one implant to the next the same.
I think it's important to mention some of the names that have already using some of the internal conus connection, and some of the top companies in the world, Astrotech, Straumann, Ankylos. These are all companies. Bicon.
Well, and you see a move toward this, and we've
Everybody's
talked about
using
this on
this.
the show, that many companies, when they first designed their implants, it's interesting to talk to people from some of these, older companies about, well, did you know when you designed the implant that this would be such a great connection? And some people maybe had an idea it would be good, but, often now you see this move away from the flat on flat type of connections,
Right,
over,
external hex.
Yeah, over to the conical connection.
Right.
And why do you think the conical connection or a Morse taper connection is important?
As of course, let's say, first of all, the Morse taper connection disperses the load down through the implant, so we are able to make, let's say, smaller diameter implants than most companies. They have a shorter connection. They have strong loads on the shoulder of the implant. We disperse the load down through the implant. We have a, let's say, over 3 millimeter connection itself on the
That's
on the
pretty
conical
deep.
connection.
I mean,
Yes.
that's deep.
It's a deep connection. Beyond that, we have, of course, the hexagon down below, which is another 1.2 millimeters, and then the screw channel all the way down. So we are, let's say, dispersing loads very well down through the implant, which allows for smaller diameter implants. And, of course, allows for, let's say, lack of micro movement and a bacterial seal. So we are placing the implants subcrestally, purposely, to retain papilla and bone. Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot right there. Now, I mean, we could spend an hour talking about internal conus connection and what we think maybe it does, and maybe we'll kind of branch off of that a little bit later. But there's another characteristic that I want you to highlight that's been since the original implant you released, is that reverse bevel at the crest of the ridge. Tell me about that reverse bevel and why that's so important.
Well, that's what I call kind of a platform switch in the on bone level. And let's say this sloping shoulder in subcrestal placement gives actually a bone seal around the implant shoulders, so that your profile coming out is really only a small hole that you are sealing through the abutment. So we have a bacterial seal with the bone, and then we basically seal the implant hole with the abutment.
So the idea is that the bone, because this is sloped away from the crest, that if it's placed subcrestally properly, then the bone should grow onto the platform, onto the implant, and just have basically the abutment being the only place where there's something that's not covered by bone.
Correct.
Okay.
Let me just say this, is that to engineer and mill abutments to that deep connection, we're talking about 4.2 millimeters, including the hex, right? Is that correct?
4.4, exactly.
4.4, because it's 1.2 plus 3.2, and then you got the screw, but let's not count the screw. Let's just say all the pressures are off the screw and on the implant. You basically are taking a two-piece implant and making it a one-piece, and that is kind of huge. We think that might mean a lot long-term, but how hard, manufacturing-wise, the tolerances that it takes. Like, I know high-level people that have seen your connection, and they have $500,000 milling machines. You know who I'm talking about. And they can't mill your connection. And I know you don't want them milling your connection, because John and I believe in OEM parts. we believe that OEM parts, and Craig Mish got on the stage. Was it Craig?
Yeah.
And he, of course, he's BioHorizon. He's multiple companies now, but he comes from Carl, who Carl, I mean, the guy is a genius. He was biomechanics, guy, which we know is kind of like...
I knew Carl through my old BioHorizon days.
So, I mean, Craig gets up there at the most recent corporate forum at the AO, and he talks about OEM parts and how it's so important because knockoff parts are bad and they don't fit well because people aren't calibrating mill machines. They're not spending time and money. How hard is it to mill this connection? What goes into that? I mean, I know you can't share trade secrets on the show, but tell us a little bit about
I can tell you normally, let's say, if you can take most connections on the market, I can make an implant, including the outside thread, on a machine within about 5 or 6 minutes. And in comparison, let's say our implants take somewhere between 12 and 14 minutes on a machine.
Wow.
So we're taking
twice the time.
More than double the time.
time.
To mill. So we're not a mass production company.
Yeah. And so that means that because what you're getting for that is you're getting the ability to have this force distribution down that low, because it basically sounds like it's the depth of the connection that's one of the more challenging parts of it.
So for the listener, I think what this means is less screw loosening.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, there is
and bacterial seal. There is no screw loosening because you can take the screw out of this implant.
That's right. You could remove the screw and it basically has no effect or no stability.
How many people have done that and you've tested that? I mean, like, I know you wouldn't say do that, but I mean, like, what do you think would happen if you if you torque the implant in place? You think a connection would come loose?
Nothing. We have people who have, had, for whatever reason, also from my old days, have used our abutments and just tapped them in without using the screw, and it works just as well, of course.
Holy smokes, man.
So the idea of as they say, cold weld is really what you're achieving here. It's the intimate fit that is intimate enough that you're trying to create the idea of a one-piece implant.
It's, in engineering terms, it's not a cold weld. It is, let's say, a locking taper. It's not a cold welding, but it is, let's say, the effect of cold welding.
Yeah, has a similar effect.
Correct.
Okay, so this sounds hard. 12 minutes to mill the connection. Why not just clone? Like in the beginning days, you had to run up against barriers. Why not just clone another company's that patent was up? Why not?
I think to produce, a better implant, to produce a better connection. I did see, of course, in my days, and since I had several implant companies that I was distributing, I could see, bone level papilla retention in different implant companies. And so I was, let's say from the engineering side, sure that the conical connection was the best connection, and was also sure that I didn't want to produce a conical connection, which many say now they have a conical connection, but the conical connection is more or less just a phase and a short taper, which puts a lot of load on the shoulder and doesn't allow you to produce smaller implants. And at that time, let's say the initial initiative was to produce a smaller diameter implant, which at that time none of the companies that I distributed had. So
we're talking 3.0s, right?
Yeah, we were the first one to put a 3.0 on the market as a two-piece implant.
Really? That's awesome.
The first ones.
Really?
To put it I don't think
I
knew
didn't.
that.
I didn't know that, Rick.
Yeah.
You were the first ones to market with a 3.0 two-piece.
That's correct. Yeah.
Wow,
Whoa.
that's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty big deal.
I'm saying I got a little bit chill bumps on this
Yeah.
spine because I'm an implant clinician.
Well, and there's
Seriously,
because before we knew about your company, has been a race to do that in the U.S. market for a while, and you've seen companies try to release that, and they would always say it's coming. But now what I'm hearing is the reason why it took a lot of these companies a long time was because the robustness of the connection was the limitation. So, for instance, I take a company, and we don't just want to pick on companies, but the truth is they're out there. like Zimmer, who
We're not afraid to name names.
No,
on
we
this
don't
show.
care. You guys know we don't care about that. But they I remember
We don't do that in Germany.
I know you
no,
don't.
Don't mention names. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Right.
I only say this because it's just a good example of
I know we're gonna have listeners in Germany.
yeah,
after
that's
this,
right.
so-
But I think about a company like that who has it's a good example of a relatively, they know this. It's not it's not critical. It's just the truth. It's a shorter connection. It's a hex connection. It's a flat on flat connection. And they struggled with producing a small 2-piece. In fact, they came out with a 1-piece, because I think that was they said, well, guys, this is going to be tough to make a 2-piece. So let's just make a 1-piece because we don't have to worry about all that. And it took them just until, a couple years ago to come out with a 3.1 2-piece, because I think they struggled and they had to redesign the connection in order to make that happen. So now you've got different parts, you've got different pieces.
And you gotta roll out a whole nother
And that's
deal.
one thing I want to maybe mention is, your implant line has only 2 connections and
2 platforms.
two
yeah.
platforms, right? 2 platforms. And the sizes are 2 millimeter and 3 millimeter. And, when people hear that, I think when I first heard that, I said, that sounds like a small connection.
He was
small
giving me a hard
platform.
time, Rick. He was giving me a hard time.
Yeah.
Well,
Because
the
I was
first-
using your system, and he's like, dude, look at that neck.
Right.
He was like, that's scary.
Because it is, when you first see it on a radiograph and you're used to seeing, a size of your platform, the size of your connection get bigger along with implant diameter, and then we see a 3.0 connection. So is it the fact that you have this deep connection why you can maintain a smaller diameter?
Absolutely, yes, correct.
And the advantage of that, whether you knew it or not at the beginning, whether you knew how well this would work, but you have more volume now for tissue and bone to be occupying that space.
Correct.
Did you know when you designed it, was that the idea, or was it more just
No, that was the idea.
That was the
I
idea.
I could see that through the other company that I was distributing, that this was the success that this company had also.
So you took a little bit from some of these companies that you had seen success with and said, I want to incorporate that idea, but I want to create something that's got kind of a blend of some of the best things and make those things better.
Correct.
Wow. That's really awesome. So I think there's been some question, and this could be like the hardest question for us to ask you, because I know that we've spent a lot of time talking about implant design and how that could affect the clinical success. But there are many recent studies that indicate that maybe implant design doesn't matter as much, maybe, as far as bone loss and implant success, and that surgical placement techniques and tissue thickness and blood supply. Tomas, to reference some of the recent studies, Linkevicius talks about that choosing the proper tissue thickness
And placing the
and
implant deep enough
to accommodate for thinner
have
biotypes
blood supply.
and have enough blood supply. And we think that, I was an Astra user for years, and I love Straumann implants and Astra implants, but their surgical protocols, whether they knew it or not, were driving you to place their implants subcrestal.
Yeah, and ankylose is another good example of
ankylose
that.
is another good
placing 2 millimeter subcrestal, that protocol, whether, it was that the thing.
Listen, we know we got at least a millimeter of above the implant,
Right.
of tissue, soft tissue, and now a 2 millimeter subcrestal. You've got 3 millimeters of biological width.
Right.
And some people have kind of questioned, Tomas, one individual, has questioned whether it's all about the placement technique and maybe not the implant design. I guess, really, do you agree or disagree with that?
Both, actually. I mean, you can take a bad connection implant, and if you have, let's say, enough, if the seating or the placement is correct, you have enough bone, you have enough tissue, and you have a patient that has, let's say, good hygiene, then you can probably keep, let's say, a good aesthetic value on that implant throughout the years. But I think that's, let's say, my reasoning is any, let's say, implant that is coming out of the bone level in the full diameter of the implant, you're going to have bacterial influence. And let's say patients, usually are not keeping the hygiene as good as they could. So let's say I think it's a mixture of both. If you have a good connection and you have a patient that is, let's say, following good hygiene, and you have enough bone, and you have enough vascularity, and you have enough tissue, then basically, then you've got, a perfect relationship all the way around, So I think it's a little bit of all, but I am, let's say, promoting that we have implants that are not coming out of the bone level and not affected by the bacterial influence of the patient, around the implant itself. So I'm trying to seal that implant so that you have, at least the possibility of not losing bone and papilla, even if the patient is not fully following the hygienic protocol.
I think what you're saying is we don't know how to treat peri-implantitis, Rick. We don't know how to treat it. And
we don't know
it's
how
unpredictable.
to treat it. It's unpredictable, and let's
So
say
you better daggone if you have.
We've seen ourselves now that let's say over the last 20 years. I mean, we have very, very few cases of peri-implantitis that I've seen with our implants, and only in the cases where the implant is coming out of bone level and we don't have this seal, then we have the same problem as other implant companies do.
Okay.
So that to me sounds like a little bit of a confirmation that if the implant's not placed deeply enough, that you can have a problem with any implant system. Correct. And I think that's
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think that Wes and I certainly, as we've talked about this a lot, we feel that's a truth that I think we've all seen, is that no matter what system, if you don't place it deeply enough, if you have inadequate soft tissue thickness, any implant system can be a problem. But the question always is, well, assuming everything is ideal, as you said, well, what are the things that could matter? And in the long run, I think the connection could matter. And that's what Wes and I certainly believe. And I think our listeners have found that as we've talked a lot about this, that
we think
in the short term,
like you may
if you
not
place it deep enough,
right,
you might not see a big difference
right.
between
At
systems.
a year, you might.
There are systems you can't place deep enough. I mean, most systems with a flat connection, you cannot place them. I mean, the literature says, you have in the first year, you got 1.6 millimeters bone loss. I mean, there's enough, studies and literature have been done there. So there's, many, many implant systems. I would say, probably 90% of the market is, there's more conical connections coming out now,
right.
Good conical connections. But let's say a good flat connection, what we considered a good flat connection, is not possible to seat subcrustally and still, retain bone and papilla, because you will have the bacterial influence and you will lose bone.
Right, and that comes back to the idea of platform shifting and why we're trying to get a smaller diameter abutment and why we're trying to have things like reverse bevel design. And I think that in the long run, especially, is where those things may matter the most. You can I think see where some of these companies that have been researching and publishing research on their implants long term, you see the ones that tend to have the most stability are the ones that have subcrustal placement with platform shifting, with conical seal, and that's all the design features that your implant has. And I find it's very interesting because I feel like the people that are coming into this after they're seeing other implant designs and they're looking at, well, what do you see with new implants? It's all of these features. Mm-hmm. And this implant you have has been around now a long time. And how many years have you had this implant a connection and everything available?
A little over 15 years now, 16 years.
And that's a long time. I mean, there's a lot of these newer implant designs that have changed within the last 3, 4, 5 years
mainly because of patents.
Well, patents, and also too because I think they see the benefit
of the internal connection
of these connections, and they're realizing that they need to change. But here you've had this same connection for 15 years and really already have these features built in. You don't need to change it.
I think we were privy to maybe some of the things that you're working on, and you're animate about maintaining this connection for various reasons. Manufacturing, it makes it easier, but when you start changing the connection, that's already good, everybody's trying to flock to, why would you do that? Why would you mess with that? You maybe would change your thread design. You maybe would change your implant body design. But when you have a shorty implant all the way up to a fatty implant that has this deep internal connection in one company, I think that's pretty impressive. And to only have 2 platforms to work on, the ease of use for the clinician, I think that that's a really awesome package.
Now, I wanted to ask. Go ahead.
We have new studies now in Germany and Europe. We have, let's say, a growing rate of peri-implantitis. We have a growing rate of titanium allergies in patients. So
Interesting.
we have our own our accredited laboratories, so we do a lot of testing for other implant companies. Also, as a smaller company, producing machines that actually are for implant connection testing. And we found that the problem now, which I'm doing a study with the University of Frankfurt and also the biggest association, implant association in Germany, is the what we call the abrasion factor. And you have parts, that are fitting together that are constantly moving, whether you tighten them down with a screw or not. But you have tolerances, otherwise the parts would not fit together.
This is what Craig Mish was talking about.
So we have. I can show you some pictures and some films that if you put the connection on a machine through 5 million cycles, the lifetime, let's say, chewing cycles that you have in the mouth, you will see that you will get a cloud of titanium particles coming out, crud coming out of the implant connection. And this is something that's now the new studies that are being done in Germany is to find out, is this affecting, because the patient is swallowing constantly.
Right.
The titanium particles are integrating into the tissue itself. You're swallowing it, and so this is something that's being now new.
So possibly
studies,
a foreign body reaction.
right? Is what do these titanium particles and many implant systems really have a problem in that there is a constant abrasion and constant wear and constant, let's say, development of titanium particles in the mouth. So,
and there's questions about whether or not that produces an inflammatory component to why maybe some connections might have more likelihood for reactions from the tissue. We heard a lot about that at the AO the last time we were out there, and discussions about, whether, zirconium is the solution to that, one-piece implants, or is it just better connections? And it sounds like you already have seen that in the testing, that the better the connection, the less that's probably going on.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I got a couple more questions about the connection, because that's kind of what we've been stuck on here for a little bit, and I like it because it's kind of high level, and I want to know, is this design more prone to what we call flowering out?
With the deep connection, you necessarily might have thinner walls of metal outside. Is that the case? Is that deeper connection, does it have an effect on the strength of the actual integrity of the walls of the implant?
No. There's a certain, a rule you have to follow. There's a certain amount of wall thickness that you, of course, need. But you have the possibilities with the dispersion of the loads through the implant. You have, let's say, thinner wall possibilities than you would have with a short connection where you're loading the shoulder of the implant.
Okay, so you don't really see flowering problems?
No.
Okay. And does, I guess really that answers my question right there. I don't know what else to ask.
Yeah,
because that's the biggest thing. People see this connection and they're like, any internal connection you see that starts to get a little deeper, I think, are we going to see implant flowers happen?
Right.
Like, are we going to in a flowering on an x-ray, it looks like a bloom of a flower, and you look down there and you're like, oh no, this is a bad day.
Right.
Because my implant abutment has been
bending.
jamming down into my implant, and it's fractured my implant fixture, and now I've got to remove that implant. That's a bad day.
Yeah, and I think that's, what we're getting from this discussion is just that, the connection is the thing that not only having this connection that is across all implants, whether you use a tapered or a parallel wall, but this connection is robust enough that it can be used down to a very narrow diameter without decreasing the strength. So as you developed these implants, and it's been over a long period of time now, obviously you're the small company going up against the big companies. And what has that been like in terms of, have you felt pushback from bigger companies, or have you just kind of focused on, we're going after a specific niche of the market that we want to prove that this design works? Do you find that the marketplace is very competitive in that way from the big? Is there pressure from larger companies toward the competition, or really no?
No, really no. The bigger competing companies are competing amongst themselves, and they really don't even though we do testing for other companies, they don't consider us really a competition.
So wait a minute. Wait, stop right there. You say you test for these bigger companies?
Mm-hmm.
So a big company sends you their implant to test to see if it's good?
Correct, yeah. In the lab. I mean, I have a separate laboratory.
Whoa.
So they don't have their own testing stuff. You
Sometimes.
Some
they
of them do.
Some
But
of them
you
do,
kind of have the market for testing implant stuff.
Correct.
And we're talking major companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, major companies, yeah.
So that means you have access to the same testing that the major companies are doing, and it's in-house. It's not something where you're having to go out. You can say with confidence, hey, I've seen what the other companies can do, and we know what our implant can do on the same machine and the same testing.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
But they don't care about you that you have your own implant.
No, because we're really not competition. Like I say, we're only taking, even in Germany, I wouldn't consider, maybe we have 5% of the market, but we're not, a major, let's say, competition for, what's out there on the market. I mean, they're all competing in mass market product, and we don't produce mass market products.
No. So that just brings me to the question of, okay, so knowing what the competition's like, what are the trends that you're seeing in the marketplace with implants nowadays? Where do you think we're going? And that could be in design, but that could also be kind of in this, there's a lot of consolidation going on. Do you see more of that happening? Where are the trends and pressures going that you see where we could be in, say, the next 5 to 10 years?
Can you speak to the U.S. market? I mean, or are you privy to that? Or just Germany?
More the European market, but I do see worldwide that, more and more companies are consolidating, trying to buy out, everything that's out there. And eventually, they will reduce the implants that they have. I mean, you cannot, in one company, effectively, have 4 different implant systems. And so I think they'll kind of consolidate the implant systems that they have. When they are, let's say, going in and buying a company, they're not buying the implant system, they're buying the customer base,
right,
and trying to expand the customer base because they're a public company, And,
right.
And
so at some point you have to reduce the number of offerings that you have to save money on all the different manufacturing. What do you think? Do you think that the price points that many of the large implant manufacturers are asking for their implants, do you think that is sustainable? Do you see that that's changing? Do you think they'll continue to, increase their pricing, or do you think that there will be a downward pressure on that?
No, I think they'll actually increase the pricing.
Really?
The more they consolidate, the more, let's say,
That's unreal.
Even Israeli companies have been bought out now by others. So I think once they consolidate, they will increase pricing.
Wow.
And not decrease.
I'll never forget that time. Wow. I didn't get to go up with you to that major implant company headquarters up in the Northeast.
Yeah, careful.
Yeah. And one of our top friends in the placement industry that places a lot of dental implants pretty much point blank says, when are you going to lower your prices?
Right.
They said nothing.
Yeah. So they don't seem to care, which is strange to me because
I think they more for the you've said this, that 95% of your influence in how you design and make choices of what to do how clinical influences the production and engineering, it goes hand in hand. These companies are more concerned. You're saying that they're not even going to change their price. They're not going to look to the clinician because they're just interested in sales.
Correct.
So basically what's
public companies,
what's driving them is the stock price, essentially. And as long as the stock price is going up, then they will raise prices because that's more profit. And so it's not really, and I feel like that's almost like, I think it's, I don't know, personally, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but I feel like that's a self-limiting thing. At some point,
it's going to break.
At some point, you see if you see a great design, as we're talking about with your implant, you see a great design with a company that's responsive to what you
They're
want,
agile.
and if their price point is lower than what some big name manufacturers, and they're providing an equal or better product, why would there not be a move toward that? And I see that maybe there won't be, but because there's a lot of markets where people just want what they're used to, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And I wouldn't, even if, let's say, if everyone wanted our implants, I wouldn't be able to fulfill the market.
Right.
We're limited in what we can do with our products because of the production times and.
Yeah, it's not made
so-
for high level production.
So I'm not,
Yeah, so that's not even something
never
you're.
would be able to cater
Right.
to the market, even though the market would.
And maybe
want
that's
maybe
why
the-
they know that they can raise prices. Is
Basically,
because
what
they-
you're saying is like, you don't care. I'm going to keep producing a great product.
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep engineering, and this is just awesome, and we
Right.
know it's great. And
Yeah, and if people want it, if people
Wanna-
believe in
they
it,
wanna
then
jump on
that's the
board?
market you're looking for.
right, and you're making a good living at it, and you love it, and so that's cool, man.
Well, I think
that's passion. That's passion.
Right. We have obviously, on our show talked a lot about crown down type of implant placement. And we know that, talking about this as far as what you're passionate about, obviously you want your product to go out there and be placed how it should be placed. And we know this is kind of a neat thing too, to be able to have you on the show, because one of our show sponsors is the Dental Crafters Network. And Argon is the type of implant that they are, the K3 implant.
Yeah, they decided to purchase your implant and be a distributor in the United States to make the Dental Crafters Network
have a complete solution.
system. So they have like the prosthetic companies and Dental Crafters, which produces the crown, but they also have the people there that make the guides, and they've been making surgical guides for years for all types, and they still do. And then because you are agile and work with Co-Diagnostics, which they use like the #1 implant planning software in the world, Co-Diagnostics, and they work with Dental Crafters, and then they're like, you know what? We see the problems with companies not being agile, and they look to you in Germany years ago, and they said, this is somebody we want to bring to the United States. And the Dental Crafters Network brought the Argon implants lines to the United States to make part of the Dental Crafters Network.
Yeah. And what do you see as being important about partnering with a company like Dental Crafters Network? What is it that does for your company and for your implants?
I mean, the same concept is what I have in Germany. I am actually a laboratory partner. So even in Germany and in other countries, we try to support the lab, and the lab, of course, knows that with this implant, he can get the best aesthetic results. So we have very, very good support in all countries from laboratories that recommend our implant system for the best, let's say, long-term patient aesthetic results. So this is kind of the concept that we have there, which follows basically what Brad or Dental Crafters is doing here also.
Now you also have brought implant solutions to Germany.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about how why did you bring implant solutions to Germany? What was so great about that?
Implant Solutions was just the name. It's the whole digital workflow, the backward planning, trying to make things easier, trying to make things more accurate, more precise, in surgery, going back from the prosthetic planning to actual surgery, and not just placing implants wherever, wherever it fits. So
CT guided surgery.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
So this is the concept behind that, which when I met Brad and from Dental Crafters, and he was following these same ideas and concepts that I had with Implant Solutions. I didn't have a name at the time for it or a company for it, so this is kind of what then I started promoting also in Europe or in Germany, was also Implant Solutions, where the company plans, mills, prints everything for the doctor. And this is what I'm trying to implement into laboratories, that they do this for the actual clinician to make sure that the clinician,
Does it right.
makes his money and does it right.
Yeah, predictability. I think that's what we're looking for, is a predictable, easy solution that is restorative driven surgery,
Right,
which
and if
starts
you have a great implant,
Right.
you that's great. But if it's not placed correctly
Right.
and you don't have good restorative, it can destroy the case. So you have to have both sides of this in order to
Right.
be able to do a great job. And there are very few implant companies that have from the top down something that can bring you from the beginning to the end with implant to crown, as well as what I think Dental Crafters Network.
Well, that's
is
one of
doing.
the reasons why that we are so glad that the Dental Crafters Network sponsors the Dental Guys, and this episode of the Dental Guys is brought to you by the Dental Crafters Network. It's your implant restorative connection, and if you've heard Rick talk about it, what we're looking for is one relationship, infinite possibilities. And listen, if you're interested in not just placing a high quality implant, but looking at prosthetic, driven surgery, surgical guides that just fit and work. Listen, the Dental Crafters Network provides one relationship, infinite possibilities. I want you to call 1-800-472-8302 today and ask for Selene over there, because listen, Selene, you know her, and like, how awesome is she to work with?
Very awesome.
Yeah, and she understands how to communicate with you. And listen, if we need a part, for anything,
Right.
it's there the next day. That's the great thing. So
Yeah, you've got good support there, and we definitely we love to be able to work with companies that are doing it right. Tell us about projects that Argon is working on that you're excited about. I know you can't necessarily share everything you're working on, but are there things that you feel like the next step for the company that you can talk about that might be exciting?
The next step is actually the zirconium implants.
Oh,
We have a strong push, of course, for metal-free. I think this is part of a problem also that too many, there's too many cases now of titanium allergies and problems with implant connections. So an alternative for some companies is zirconium implants. The problem is the material is not as elastic properties as titanium has. So it's been bigger implants for those companies that have produced a zirconium implant. They've not been in smaller dimensions where actually you can put them in aesthetic areas. We will be coming out this fall with a zirconium implant. It's a new material. It's a more flexible material. It's a two-piece implant starting at 3.3 millimeter diameter. So it will be a
3.3.
is that reserved for the anterior,
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Is that one of the smaller zirconium implants available?
It's the smallest.
It's the smallest.
and
the
let me ask you this: is that the connection? You said two piece. Is that a metal connection, or is that a zirconium?
It's a zirconium. It's a let's say
I don't know how much you can
zir-
tell, but
it's a zirconium implant. It's an abutment, different materials on the abutment side, and it's a stabilizing pin in the middle, something like a screw, which basically then flares out the taper on the bottom and gives you the tight conical connection.
So it's not a cemented abutment.
no.
It's a pin type
It's a
of
pin
connection.
type of connection, yeah.
interesting.
Well,
Snap pin type of connection, yeah.
Well, we've been definitely interested in where that's going because
We have patients that
there's-
occasionally ask for this.
there are patients that ask for it, and there's
Yeah, there's a
definitely
lot of marketing and a lot of push from the bigger companies, of course.
that's
to
right.
Get a different direction, and of course, there's a lot of marketing behind it. Yeah.
Sure.
But the failure rate, it's
Yeah.
almost like we
right
tell.
now it's a problem with some of the big companies we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking high failure rates here. What's the problem there?
I think the material is a problem, and I think the surface is a problem. Now, we on the titanium, we don't, on our titanium implants, we don't use any blasting materials. I use an acid treatment only. I'm trying to achieve not only cavities, by blasting the surface or getting a rough surface. I'm trying to get undercuts, so you get faster healing times. And I developed over, let's say, last 7-8 years, even though the zirconium oxide material has not been, let's say, ideal for making an implant, which is just now coming new materials, I have found a way to acid treat the zirconium oxide surface so that I'm really getting very, very good surface. And
So you think the
so
surface roughness has maybe been
I
some
think
of the problem?
Some of the problems, yes.
Okay.
I think it's been, a very hard material, no roughness on the surface, and then, of course, a lack of, let's say, osseointegration, or let's say less success than you would have with titanium.
How long have you been testing these?
Say the surface we've tested. I've done some studies. This has been seven years now.
Wow.
7 years in the making, and you're just now launching it.
Correct.
Wow, it's probably so it took you 2 years to launch a titanium, but this is a real problem. You
Right.
feel like that how are you testing? I mean, I don't know. Do you test it in pig jaws, or do you test it in like a dog, or how do you do these?
We've tested in sheep. We've done some pig studies, and we're also testing in sheep study. And now we did some clinical studies comparing the implant, titanium implant, to the zirconium implant.
And I think
there's some publications coming out. I'm doing this with the University of Witten in Germany.
Okay.
And the publications are coming out now.
Man.
In the
Well,
fall.
we're interested because the two piece is definitely, I've seen some of the one piece zirconium implants.
problem, John.
And it's a big potential problem. Not only because placement has to be absolutely perfect, but oftentimes these tops are being prepped, in the mouth, and so you got a lot of heat generation. There's been some discussion about whether that could cause problems. So I think
who
a
likes to
two-piece
grind on zirconium
right,
in the mouth?
a
I
two-piece
come on.
two-piece design is certainly the future. But there's been issues with, if you're cementing abutments in, I've always get a little nervous about cement in an abutment or in an implant in the mouth around the bone, and how well does that hold? And this is interesting. At 3.3 especially. So this is, if you guys are listening to this, you're thinking. So let's just recap. We have a company that designed the very first 3.0 two-piece implant in the world, right? Mm-hmm. Wow. And then we now are talking to the same company that is going to release the world's smallest two-piece zirconium implant at a 3.3, and it's not cemented. Guys, if you're not getting a little excited about this,
I'm getting a little excited.
then I think you're living under a rock here, because this is the kind of products that we see the need for. I mean, there was just a great article in Jomi about how good the pink aesthetic score, white aesthetic score could be for zirconium implant in the anterior. But, before I'm going, oh, well, I don't know, this sounds great, but we don't have two-piece, we don't have small diameters. And here Ric says, well, we're on it, guys, and that's what we're working on. And so I guess I just want to, maybe the final question that I think we should ask is, what are some of the things that our listeners should avoid or look for when choosing an implant system? And obviously we know this is coming from somebody who has a system they're selling.
We're a little bit biased,
right?
But
but if somebody's choosing a system, okay, and they're looking and they want to know what are the most important things, what would be some of the top things to avoid and some of the top things to look for?
I think a good conical connection, of course, for bone and papilla retention is very important. Especially when you have, the patient problems of recall and hygiene. And I would think they should get with an implant company that maybe, has and fulfills the needs of the doctor. Not only just a mass market product, but also, niche products, fulfilling the complete line. We not only do implants, we do transplant material, we do everything that involves in implantology, we do membrane fixation, screws, everything that's surrounding the implant business. So I think a full line company is also very important, so that he's not looking, in different companies for different products.
So try to keep it in one place, that the company that provides one place where they can come that's innovative but still listening, and that has like everything from bone, to all the way through an implant design. That way you're not piecemealing your cases.
Right.
Because, we all, that's the problem, is like anytime that I've ever restored a case that's piecemealed, it's tough. John and I were talking about overdentures the other day, and what's going to happen whenever we have some of these, quote unquote, we had to fix this case with some special part. Mm-hmm. That's a problem. And when you stay with one system, inside a patient, inside a practice, really, It's hard to stay inside of one system in a practice. I mean, there's solutions that some companies don't offer, but it makes it easier. It really does.
Yeah.
It really does.
From an inventory standpoint, from a ordering standpoint, that sure is nice to be able to have, your assistant who's doing ordering be able to just go to one website or one place and just be able to make sure that everything's compatible. There's no more questions about, which company's part is this as I'm putting it back into the drawer, and that's something that I know for Wes and I, I believe we counted the other day, I have 12 different systems worth of stuff
archive
in my office, all these different cases and wrenches and screwdrivers. And, you get to a point where you go, okay,
how much money have you spent?
Right. How much money have you spent, and how much in inventory is just sitting there? It's probably, $25,000 in inventory just over time.
You don't even realize it.
And just like Rick, you've come through, the years of seeing what works and what doesn't. Wes and I have done the same from a clinical standpoint, and we just see where we're looking for the same thing. We're looking for something that can work for hopefully every case or almost every case, and one place that we can go and be able to have a relationship. Maybe more importantly than all of that is a relationship with a company where they want what we want, and they are listening, and they are interested in making the changes that can make things better, and that's at the end. That's where you're coming from. We're all going to make money if we do a good job, but in the end, it's feeling good at the end of the day that we put in a good product and that you produced a good product. I think that's what a lot of us are looking for.
Well, listen, if you're go ahead now.
One of the most important things also, I think, would be to find a company that not only produces a good implant and a good connection, but also a company that supports the lab. I see a real problem today in that, let's say, the big conglomerates are taking the lab work away.
That's true.
They're doing everything themselves. The lab is the partner for the clinician. He's local. He's giving him support. And I think it's very bad that the industry is taking, the lab work for themselves. What we're going to be left with, only the option to go to industrial companies doing everything for us, and then we're really in their hands, so.
Well, I think this is great. Listen, if you're listening to this show right now, I think that, one, it's pretty special to be able to talk to somebody like this.
Yeah.
And I want you to go over and I want you to tell us, what you think about this show. Like us on Facebook, but more importantly, I think it's important that you go over to the Facebook page or the Twitter, and you private message us and tell us how much you've enjoyed listening to Rick talk about this, and we'll definitely give some feedback. If you want to get in touch with Rick, we can provide that and how to talk to the company that he represents and that he owns. And we are excited, and I really want to say thank you so much for spending your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we grilled you a little bit, but you had some really good answers. You blew our minds, really, to be honest with you, and we're super, super appreciative of you doing this with us. So for Wes and John, we really thank you for that. So one thing we need you guys to do, and we're really working on this, is we want you to go to iTunes right now and give us 5 stars. It's really important that we get our message out, and you guys are the way we get it out. We don't do any advertising with Facebook or Twitter right now. We solely rely on word of mouth, and you need to tell your friends what you're listening to. And we're excited to bring you this type of content. If you want to keep hearing this type of content, tell us that, because that helps us. Tell us what you want to hear, because we're listening to you.
Yeah.
And if you haven't listened to our previous episodes, go back. There's some good stuff there. So I'm going to close the show now. And so for Wes, the dental guy, for Rick, the owner dental guy of a dental implant company, and for John, the dental
I'm the
guy.
implant guy.
Yeah, you're there we go. That's it. For Wes, the dental guy, for Rick, the implant guy, and for John, the dental guy, we are the dental guys.